Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. My guest in today's episode is Vadym Kazulkin. Vadym is one of the few AWS heroes in Germany. He's focused on serverless and Java. He's also a principal cloud architect with decades of experience. We talked about what serverless really means and how it actually works in production, why some companies embrace it while others stay away. I learned about his passion for Java and why it still has its place in modern platforms, although I understand it's a bit tricky for serverless processing. If you're working with the cloud, thinking about serverless, or just curious what's coming next, this one is worth a listen for you. It's actually the second time we recorded this podcast. The first recording unfortunately got lost because of technical problems, but we again had a lot of fun. So let's get into it. Hey Vadym, welcome again.
Yeah, Andreas. Yeah, I'm back now.
Yeah.
Hopefully, with the recording that will be recorded.
True. Yeah, I've been looking through a few things that we were talking in the original recording, and I think the start was very interesting for me. I was mentioning that I saw on your LinkedIn that you were visiting a AWS summit in Hamburg, and that you're also talking at these events. So I just want to get a bit of feedback from you, or your impression of how are these events? Because I've never been there to one of them.
So Summit, and it was basically the second one. I visited last year, one in Warsaw. It was a bit smaller. Of course, it's a huge event, but from different perspective. Partners, startups. I was basically in the area of where the technical talks took place. So where the technical people, there are different kinds of them in AWS space, like community builders, heroes, or passionate technical people. So I was around the stage where such talks have been given. There were 7, for the whole day, like nearly 1 hour with a short break. And it was a huge stage. Everything was set up like, I don't know, 500-600 people maybe. And
Okay.
all the talks were quite well visited, and it's kind of impressive. And of course, the whole technical setup, AWS knows what they do. So this is really huge event. I think in total there have been 10,000 people, something like this. So it's quite a huge event, but it was first time in Hamburg. Normally it was in Berlin. I haven't visited it the last years. They now decided just to spread. Just to be in another city in Germany. It's only the community there for the DACH region. There are others in Europe. There is the biggest one, as far as I know, is in London, and there are in Madrid, Tel Aviv, so in the capitals, basically, and of course around the world. That's with the keynotes, but they are basically the same, but in the local language. And the summits are basically one after another. So there have been probably 10 summits within 2 weeks in parallel with different people, different setups. It's a huge industry probably behind that, to set it up and then to destroy everything, like the whole stages, and then move to another city. So there is a lot of logistics behind, but impressive events.
So, but for you as someone very experienced with AWS and being an AWS hero, I can see, okay, you most likely want to be there. And how is that for somebody who's just a beginner? Is that also interesting for these people, or do you need some foundations to actually take something home?
There are also foundational talks there, but and because the area is so big that you can basically also find the space where the people who would like to start the cloud journey can also receive some talks, or just how to jump into it, what are the partners, maybe certifications. So there is, of course, a space there. And I even was thinking to say the community day. This is a smaller event organized by the local communities, not by AWS. It could be a good fit, but there are only 30 talks, or even less, depending on the city. So that might be quite advanced. But basically, yes. But I think everybody can find so much information now on YouTube, or even on some Udemy course. So I think that all those events are also about networking. And if you are for the first time, it might be not very easy to find somebody. You need just to to establish contacts to the people. So it's of course about what's the purpose. So my first AWS event was the AWS Community Day DACH in Cologne 2000, I would say 17 or 18. It was the first community day ever. Yeah, this was, I live near Cologne. I just visited and I wanted just to figure out, because the cloud was quite new here in Europe, just how to get the fit there. Yes, but now they became bigger and bigger, and there is so much open knowledge, to be honest.
Cool.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, but for you, also for you as a AWS hero, serverless hero, I would say, was that something where you were super interested in? So something specific?
For me, there have been two topics. The hottest topic of the year is sovereign cloud, and we expected some announcements around this, and there have been some that AWS will open kind of the data center, which will be completely under control of you, somewhere in Brandenburg. That was announced, and we wanted to know a bit more details, how it will be operated, how it's really completely decoupled. So that was basically one of the informations, and I knew that also other people wanted to know exactly that. And the second one was, for me, I meet a lot of people whom I know from the community. Sometimes I have seen them in previous events, sometimes I have not seen them, but the AWS Summit DACH is kind of the central point that the people all over Europe and sometimes even outside come. So it was more about just also networking, just sitting, talking. There are different people having own companies, working for somebody, being in the company as AWS partner. So they have different challenges just to talk through. That was basically also my intent, more even networking than visiting too many talks. And it was worth it for me.
Okay. Interesting. I already mentioned AWS Serverless Hero. Can you give us a bit of an introduction of what is it about serverless, or what serverless actually means for people that just listen to this and starting out with data engineering and maybe come from a different field?
Serverless, probably one of the, as always in this industry, overloaded term. So basically it was meant that you use the the service, which is completely managed by the cloud provider. So you basically only configure it, or you write the business logic like AWS Lambda, where you simply choose your runtime, the programming language, and ship the code. And of course, it should be triggered by some event, HTTP event, queue, or something like this. So the basic idea was that you focus more on the business logic and leave everything else, what AWS and others call undifferentiated heavy lifting, very difficult word, to somebody else. This was what was basically intention. Just because you are probably not in the networking business, so why should you pay attention to all this VPCs, security groups, and all that stuff? So basically, try to raise the abstraction so that you focus on more on the business side. But now, I mean, all these generative AI services, or some of them like AWS Bedrock, you can consider them as a serverless, because you basically use it via API. You provide the foundational model, you provide some prompt, and you receive the answer. So you can consider this also now as serverless, basically. You don't need to train the models. You don't need to run any infrastructure for that. So you basically use something as a software as a service, which is not the cloud term per se. We are using now Restream, which is probably serverless for us. We simply consume that and have video stream here. So this is basically the idea. Of course, as always it is, there is nothing that is kind of having only advantages. There are disadvantages, because if you develop that application with AWS Lambda and so on, everybody figured out they are very much microservices-like. And microservices are distributed systems with their traps and tricks and so many parts that can something go wrong with very difficult tracing. observability and also some cost consideration. So it's not for every company. Maybe we will be talking about this, but basically, yeah, you need to think what's the most important for you. If it's maybe the speed, and you then focus on the business logic. If you have people and skills to manage something on your own, then stick to that. Yes, probably not everybody will build a data center today, but there is nothing wrong in the data centers as well. For certain scenarios, not everybody is kind of scaling out like a hell and needs that. So if you can predict the traffic, there is nothing wrong in the data center. Yeah, and if it's secure enough, for example, and you are happy with the uptime of your data center, yeah. But serverless was also considered. It's not my uptime, basically the uptime of the services of the cloud provider, which also leads that you need a lot of trust because you cannot do anything in case something happens. Well, basically, you can design it active, multi-region, all this crazy stuff which comes with other trade-offs. Yeah, that's we're probably all consultants and say it depends. Everything is a trade-off, and it is. It's honestly it is.
I get it. Yeah, I mean, servers have sometimes also upsides, and hosting something on your own instead of using it as a serverless or using it hosted by the cloud providers sometimes has trade-offs. Like, what made you get into this topic of serverless? And because AWS serverless hero, like what specifically was it for you?
So for me, it was I'm now within 19 years in the same company, and we started by having multiple data centers around the world even. Yeah, and we didn't even manage hardware in some data centers, which led to the situation we had the same product, but the hardware was completely different, and it was sometimes it could not scale because of the storage or because of the load balancer. It was for us just, and we could not even understand because we didn't know even characteristics. We used that data center by our kind of mother company, and for us it was then 2018 to harmonize everything, which meant also then to go to some public cloud provider. And of course, yeah, we struggled through. We needed a bit software, hardware, end of the year and the Christmas, where we scaled because our product is X time more consumed during the Xmas phase, and we simply knew 8 weeks to purchase something we needed instantly, basically. So it was the game was over when we discovered it later that okay, the situation changed once again after 1 year, and our calculation were not correct. And that led us to the cloud itself to explore it and just to migrate then to AWS, all the pieces which took many years. But it currently turned out to be kind of the company with a lot of developer capacity and with less classical system administrator capacity. And for us, it was how we can utilize it the best way. Yeah, we had and still have very, very strong engineers. So we just tried out this AWS Lambda API gateway stuff on some internal project just to understand what is that, because it was completely new. And it started to pivot for us. Yeah, learning curve, NoSQL databases like DynamoDB, it's completely different, but the people were really eager to learn, and we saw the benefits. Yeah, it requires right architecture, but we could ship, the teams could ship independently without waiting for some others. And it started that we started with we use serverless more and more, and even for our central systems we now use completely serverless solution. But we have, of course, all the parts which are even completely serverless, and we have parts which are Dockerized. So we have a good mixture. But for the newer stuff, we see, can we build it in the kind of serverless way, just to ship it quickly. But once again, we were allowed to go this journey. It had a huge investment in terms of knowledge curve, and we had this type of organization where kind of more developer centric. All others might be completely different. You might probably need Kubernetes because you are multi-cloud and you need something in common, and then containers and Kubernetes is the platform that you can even switch between cloud providers, at least partially. There are, of course, other like storage and all this stuff. But the answer is always, here it depends on what's your biggest challenge. Sometimes you don't have time to gain the knowledge, and you go with the common things that work for you, where you have the knowledge to try maybe to raise a bit of abstraction. I mean, manage DC2 instance is also kind of abstraction. Yeah, you don't set up the servers and all the way down in Dockerize stuff, or platform as a service is also raise of abstraction. So find the right abstraction which might work for your type of organization.
And so that got you into serverless.
Mhm.
And I know from the last time we talked, actually, personally, you're very interested in the Java version of serverless, or working with Java in the serverless. You also gave talks about this. Like, what is it for you again that with Java and serverless?
Yeah, it's not indeed my private topic. I was a Java developer for many decades, I can say, and we have still Java monolith at our company. But as we jumped into the serverless, we discovered, and that was 6-7 years ago, that the Java was not made for it that time. Yeah, because this is function that short-lived functions execute the code, and then the whole environment goes, and the whole ecosystem of Java was not designed for that. It was designed for a bit lower start time, but then scaling horizontally, like web application servers. And if this function is a server, that's completely different. And we experienced very bad performance with Java for public-facing application. That's why at work we decided to go. Now we are basically with TypeScript, but we selected JavaScript runtime, that you don't have this Java virtual machine, and it was quite quick. But I personally stick to that because I love Java, I love ecosystem, and I just wanted to see would it be there any solutions developed. And it turned out, yeah, we have with AWS own Snapstart and GraalVM native image, two solutions. Yeah, basically in this space, just that you can decrease these startup times so that your functions become more performant. And I stick to that, and I investigate this completely in my private time, and talk about it and engage with the community, just to say, okay, if we would now stay with that decision to choose the programming language, we could stick with Java. Yeah, but for us, the train is more or less over. The engineers know TypeScript, and then it's beneficial to have all of these Lambda functions in the same programming language, so we don't need just to over-engineer. But there are other companies that may now decide. Yeah, and many use Spring framework. I also talked about how to do it efficiently. So what are the caveats? So this is basically how I did that, and yeah, quite interesting kind of. Sometimes it takes time, really years, to provide valid solutions for some, I would say, kind of challenge. And see, .NET has the same challenge. It's also a virtual machine, the same characteristics. Yeah, so quite interesting.
I guess that is from a, because no, let me say it the other way around. Because when I talk with people and data engineers or data scientists and so on, everybody's always talking about Python, right? So you would think that most people use Python there, but I think also, like I said, TypeScript, JavaScript is one of the stronger options that a lot of people use, right?
For serverless, for sure, this JavaScript and derivatives. Normally, it's Node.js runtime, but you can use Python there. TypeScript there. And Python are the most favorable languages for function as a service. AWS Lambda or Azure or Google Functions. This is indeed. Yeah, because other characteristics. But sometimes I also see that Python is not the quickest one. But anyway, quite mature programming language. Now it gives you access to the language, to the foundational models, because all this API, all these frameworks, TensorFlow, PyTorch, they first exist in Python. So yeah, this is what we see in the statistics, that these two both probably are responsible for 80% of the function as a service, and all other runtimes, Java, .NET, PHP, We see now the rise of Rust, interestingly, because it's memory safe programming language and a hell is a quick. But it takes time because it's. I personally, I tried it. You need time to adjust to that. Yeah, it's just I sometimes think of coming back to C++ era of me. But anyway, I see, especially if your application is really, it's about each millisecond of performance, then people can decide for us. But of course, then there is the situation knowledge. Can you hire engineers? Can you upskill engineers? How you deal with that? That they probably will leave for a company which will pay for this exclusive knowledge. So you need to think a bit more how you can maintain this system, yeah, how you can hire. But we saw this with Go, and we saw it with other languages which are quite near to Java, like Scala. I remember, I would say 15 years ago, Scala became popular because it gave you a syntaxes, more concise syntaxes. Yeah, it just turns out nobody is really too much using this language, but the Kotlin, which was then after this, became hugely popular in this Android ecosystem. Yeah, so this is sometimes the languages, or kind of you can combine Kotlin to Java Virtual Machine, then they have certain use case also. Yeah, and people even use directly Kotlin. So that's very interesting. There are so many programming languages and so many debates, which is the best. Like that become sometimes religious.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true.
uh,
And when you say something about one language, everybody's jumping out and like, oh, how can you say something like that? Because they're using it. Yeah, I get it. Now with Java and serverless, it sounds like this is a great choice for, let's say you're in a larger company, they're making that switch. They have a lot of developers that are, let's say, traditional developers, right? So they can actually get hands on the cloud with serverless really quickly.
yeah, many enterprise companies use Java. Yeah, this is the field. But of course, it's the question: do enterprise company go serverless? They are quite big, and there are of course policies, securities, and all that stuff. And the worry of the cloud lock-in might be there. It's still the question, and this that's why this all the sovereign cloud topics, which because this is additional dependency, and we see now the political situation around the world also impacts that, and it's for real. Yeah, it's just if you rely on something, it might be closed, or you can get rid of, you will revoke the access to something. So this is, of course, always this should be looked from different angles on this type of the situation. The decision is not it's very easy just to start with some programming language, but you need to think through a bit of years how you would like to maintain, what are the chances. Um,
Yeah.
that's probably I'm not working in this type of organization that these concerns are really important, but I know a lot of other people who do, and they need to decide carefully.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned this a bit, like with the whole EU rules, the how are they called? The AI Act,
Yeah.
DSA, GDPR, like all this kind of stuff. It sets limits on your choices. It's very often also a large documentation effort, right?
It depends, of course, on the type of the software. If you are something in the health industry or financial industry, then there are so many regulations. But I totally understand that the data needs to be protected, and that's a personal data, highly personal data. If somebody hacks my health kind of history, not always very pleasant. Yeah, so this is of course with a high responsibility and sensitivity. Then of course the obligations should come. So that's totally fine. It's um, we are in the industry of providing software for purchasing photo products like calendars, photo books, prints, posters. But also there we are dealing with the private photos.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we need just to be careful. Yeah, we need to test. So if we somehow open access for the foreign pictures for somebody or
Yeah.
interchange some IDs, that might become a really bad situation. Yeah, even if there is nothing bad on the photos themselves, but that's a security leak, and that's a reputation loss and all that stuff. So, but we are not in this. I don't think that leaves depend on our software. I would say, so everybody can live without that, at least. Yeah, but there are other software and this X-ray and all that stuff that need to be regulated, probably.
But do you think for these companies, like in the financial market and I said in the health sector and insurance stuff, that serverless is a problem for them or can be a problem for them?
I would say they will probably stick to something, maybe containerized application. So that's my feeling, that they will probably do more classical stuff, because I really don't hear too many success stories going with serverless by bigger companies, or completely serverless or partially. Of course, everybody uses S3 storage and they say we are using serverless. Yeah, it's too easy. It's serverless service, but it's probably not the application. From the bigger companies, we hear some divisions of Lego use serverless because they promote this quite, and the post Netherlands, they use completely serverless from the bigger companies. Of course, smaller companies, especially startups, a better fit because you can deliver quickly. As a startup, you don't want to mess up with the infrastructure. You don't know whether you will be surviving or not. So no infrastructural commitments is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But of course, the startups are probably not percentually not the biggest pie.
Yeah, I
here.
think I saw some charts. I need to bring this up somehow, where they showed the percentages of customers, of startup customers for AWS, GCP, and Azure, and a lot of startups were actually within GCP, but they didn't have the larger company base that like AWS has. This was very super interesting infographic. Yeah, but and of course, as a startup, you want to act fast. Maybe you need to switch a service.
I mean, serverless cost a scale with number of users, and you probably don't have many, so it's dead cheap, and you can close everything very quickly. And of course, if you then are successful and you scale, or you can pivot or whatever, then you can even rethink and re-architect. So all successful companies re-architected their solution X times. And this is what I'm personally missing from serverless, that they give you AWS, at least on AWS cloud, kind of more abstraction, maybe not to think too quick to re-architect, just to be able to move to containers a bit more easily if you would like. So there are some missing primitives, which are currently also kind of people requesting that. But it's probably another story, because that's why people often don't start with serverless, because they know the migration cost will be higher than to containers, because you need to rewrite lots of things, even in infrastructure as code part, because it's completely different. And this is, of course, if you close this gap as an offering, then you may take the fear away from the people just to start. If they know that they might migrate, if they need at least certain functions to containers and it's quick, then they will do it. Because I think that in the world, with some exception, the financial situation is that nobody would like simply to invest time in migrations without providing business value. It's not the right time for this. Just simply for changes, you need to justify to the business, and this type of talking is probably not very easy in the current world.
As always with engineering, right? It's always just a necessity.
Always. But I mean, of course, now a lot of Gen AI stuff coming, but simply just to re-architect that it scales better or whatever, it's always difficult discussions with the managerial roles in the company. And that's why we always kind of provide better abstractions to reduce the cost of the switch within the same cloud provider. That they don't want you to go somewhere else, I totally understand, but at least within the offering of the cloud provider, if you see you need something else, that should be easy.
Interesting. Do you think there's a mindset shift that people need to do to actually embrace serverless or go serverless compared to the old style of doing it?
It requires, of course, a bit different the mindset, because you need to see what you are responsible for. It's basically security of the code itself, security of your application, and you give away a lot to the cloud provider. And sometimes it requires this loss of control is always the question. And I discovered that it's worth it, but it might be scary to start. If just there is some outages and you cannot do anything, and all this uptime stuff, and sometimes there are limitations of the services, and you start and you see these limitations in terms of how much it can scale. You can request more scaling, you need to justify that, but there are always some limits, and you sometimes don't know when you will reach them. So you need to monitor, think, and sometimes people see huge limits and don't want to start with the first user even, because in 10 years I cannot do this. In 10 years there will be other limits, because cloud providers also kind of increase that. But there is, of course, some emotional discussions that you completely depend on cloud provider, on the pricing of the cloud provider. You cannot do some other choices. But I always ask you, how often have you switched the database? How often have you switched the web application server? And it turns out nobody does that. Even if these databases might be SQL compatible, like MySQL or Postgres, nobody does that. There is no fear in this space, but the fear of the cloud provider on the other side. And these are the discussions. They're valid, probably, because cloud provider can raise the costs. It doesn't happen frequently, but it happens. This type of discussions, this is the mindset, I think, but these are valid questions. I also saw that other organizations answer them differently. And it also requires commitment from the cloud provider to improve the services. And for example, many people now see that existing services will not be improved in that frequency that we are used to, and all cloud providers are developing generative AI services. And this is something that breaks this kind of trust and commitment that the services I'm currently using, and there are so many businesses which cannot benefit from Gen AI, to be honest. They would like just what they are doing, that might become easier, solving technical problems. And we see 80% announcements are currently around generative AI. And this is another part of this story, that you sometimes can be let alone with some broken abstractions or not completely done. And who knows, will be there some improvements or not. That's why I totally understand all those discussions.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because right now we are in this hype. It feels like we're at the top of the Gen AI hype, and everybody's talking about it and developing stuff. But they will come to a place where they see, okay, like you said, a lot of our customers don't even use this because it doesn't help them. We need to focus again on the other services.
That's true. This hype curve is always the same. That was with the cloud in general, with serverless, and with all these paradigms like containers. We saw that. I have kind of a feeling that this generative AI hype will take longer. We will see different phases of them, but it might take longer because basically 5 months ago nobody knew what MCP is, and everybody does that like a hell. And this is, I think it's the beginning. 5 months later, maybe nobody will be talking about MCP, but it will be some evolution of this. And it seems to be that the story is kind of, it can take years probably to make these all things more accessible for the people in terms of pricing, in terms of also understanding and engineering. So what do you need for that in terms of security? Because now you have natural language as a boundary and you can ask the system to reveal the secret. So very, very interesting area, but I think it's kind of open end. You can do so many things, and it will revolutionize jobs and make something obsolete, or we need to do it differently. So I see that type of hype can take longer, which then I am kind of a bit scared that the usual business of the companies, current companies, is kind of a bit forgotten with the cloud era. They promise you to deliver the stuff that you can use and ease your life. This is something that we need probably to observe, how that will be in the next months, even years.
Yeah. That fits very well into my next question. So what do you think, like, what is the future of serverless? Where is this going in the next few years?
I probably see that we are maybe done with 90%. So there are good abstractions. People who know the benefit of the companies can use them. I personally don't expect too many evolutionary stuff like that it will be ease the development, but I see the evolution of this software as a service, which you can see as a kind of serverless, like using Bedrock, using Gemini, all the stuff that is in certain sense for us serverless because it gives us this abstraction or using all the stuff per API basically, which is unimaginable years ago. So this will be the evolution of this. I think we will be more or less forgetting what serverless is, and we'll be more talking about just having access to all these SaaS products. But I personally don't expect too many new things coming. In terms of AWS, now 3 months or several months ago, they released Aurora DSQL. This is the Postgres compatible database, which scales to zero and scales up nearly instantly. And with certain limitation, doesn't support everything on the Postgres SQL standards. So the missing sequences, there will be no foreign keys probably, or coming later. But in terms of select, insert, update, delete, they have everything you need. And this is kind of gives the first really serverless database on AWS, because others had other trade-offs. Either you could not scale to zero, or you could, but then the first request, and it took seconds for this database to start, which was then performance impact. This one seems to be different, and they really used a lot of innovation in the other areas just to deliver that. So this is the huge evolution. It went GA. We need to observe how it will be used. But this is something where people said, because I use DynamoDB NoSQL database, and it's different to the relational ones. And sometimes you can say, for my business, it's totally fine to use well-known SQL database, and I would like to stick it and don't use that NoSQL stuff. So I'm pretty happy with that, but it's kind of exception. Yeah. So this is the first true serverless service released by AWS since years. Yeah. All others were some features, basically improvements of existing ones. So I don't know, will be there something really helping serverless developers to be more productive. I see that we are kind of in this saturated phase. Yeah, 80% is there, and now the whole industry demands generative AI evolution. So let's jump there. For me, it sounds like that. I can live with that because we have a lot of knowledge. We can work with that. But for other companies, it might be like, okay, not enough investment. We probably don't want.
Interesting. So is there something, you mentioned Bedrock, but is there something that you're currently specifically looking into? Like that is new,
I'm looking to all this generative AI stuff, prompt engineering, just understanding things, how they work beyond, trying things out. Like I took this or the SQL database, or not I took it, but AWS exposed that like MCP server. So I could use Python Strand API just to talk to the database, which I created, and push the data in natural language. It was my first attempt to do this. of course, I can switch different models and try just to see how they work with that, how I need to prompt it. But of course, it's sometimes really interesting that you can simply ask the question, give me just, I don't know, the users who ordered more than once within the last 2 weeks, without need to think how to create SQL
Cool.
for this, which gives the access to the people, not technical people, basically, to this type of stuff. But I'm also looking to this because there are for sure use cases that will be interesting for many others. Just to think through it, and it's quite interesting, kind of. That's not need to be not underestimated. And you need just to pick what's the right thing. And of course, on each job there are different challenges that can be solved in partially through this type of things. And so why not? This is for me, and I learn Python, with my younger son, who is 8 years old. So I currently he heard something about that, and we say, okay, let's start together.
Cool. That's awesome. I think that is cool that when you start learning this from a young age. I started coding very late. Like I could have used that before.
Oh, my first PC was with 17. As I finished the school and then went to learn informatics to the university, but we didn't have money. But somehow, just to stimulate and that I could work at home and did my homework, then we bought this. Of course, this young generation, they are growing with all that stuff. And if we see what maybe 1 year later he is not interesting, but now, so why not? I try to explain more the concepts of the programming language, and there are so other many stuff like Scratch Junior apps where you can have building blocks of programming and push them. We started with that, and it was kind of easy for him. Now he writes very simple code. It's just print input. But this young generation, they are so quick. This is sometimes the access to the information changed. It's so much. First 30 years ago, I needed to buy a book or go to the library.
True.
But now everything is really open.
And I think also with ChatGPT, with all these LM platforms or tools, it's gotten a lot easier as well. You don't need to go to Google and search for a solution, and you don't need to go to Stack Overflow and look if somebody had the problem.
Yeah, my older children, they even ask ChatGPT to recommend their studies after school. They just put in what is the area of their interest, and asked. It's not the topic if they use that, but this is how they interact, not with parents, but with ChatGPT.
I'm going to see, because our oldest is 9, so let's see how she handles all this in her studies.
But they use it for school, and of course the teachers know that, so it's everything is prohibited more or less. But it helps. Just it becomes easier for them to talk, even just ask for information in the natural language without typing somewhere. They know prompt. They now study prompt engineering, basically. How we studied years ago how to use Google search. You need also to give some information just to become something back, and this is basically now the same. They don't know the terms prompt engineering probably, but what they are doing is essentially just giving the right prompt to become, just to receive the qualified answer.
Which is very important. For somebody who just starts out with serverless, like, is there something that you say, oh man, if I would have known this when I started out, that's something that is super important?
These are basically, as I mentioned, not technical stuff. So maybe the thing that I learned through the years, don't jump into some hype. evaluated from different angles, also from the business perspective angles. Yeah, talk to the business people, ask, yeah, what's the most important, what are their biggest risks, and just the good thing is we have different types of abstractions. Also, you can do the stuff now in the data center. If you would like to manage the platforms, you can do serverless and Kubernetes or something like this. So just simply, yeah, that's of course sometimes the decision to do something more on the managerial level, just to decide. That's the same as with programming languages and all the stuff. But just not to be too emotional. Yeah, just try to think through what's the paradigm is the better for you from very different perspectives, timely perspective, business goals, knowledge, and make those decisions wisely, basically. Yeah, things through migration scenarios, what could be. If you don't know, there are so much information or consulting companies to help you with. That is basically the thing. I mean, there are lots of use cases for serverless, and we talked about startups, but also major companies. But all companies are different, and you should not neglect all other types of kind of decision metrics.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Vadym, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas, for inviting me. I hope now we made it.
Yes, we made it. It's through. It looks like the recording went well. I hope that we meet each other on an event soon. And
Yep.
I know you're also doing talks, so have fun on these talks that you have in the next few months.
Yeah, thanks. I have a summer pause now also
Okay.
to take care of the family, maybe refresh and think what I can upgrade or what I can improve. Yeah, and then there will be a lot of community days, AWS community days, then starting from September.
Yeah.
So
August is more the month where everybody
there are
takes
some
vacation.
online events, might be the case for me, but yeah, September, October is always kind of AWS community days around the corner, like Netherlands, Germany in Munich in October. That will be quite interesting.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Vadym.
Yeah, thanks,
See you
Andreas.
soon.
Yeah, thanks.